Hello all and welcome to our daily news show, The Big Story, where we talk about the hottest topics of today right in the heart of the newsroom. I'm Kimberly Jiao coming to you live from the Straits Times, and we are streaming on YouTube and Facebook, so do leave us a comment, like and share it with your friends, as well as hit the bell to be told whenever we go live. Today's big story, we'll be talking about climate change and why the UN has been calling it the defining issue of our time. So don't go away, because this is going to be a special episode on climate change, and we're going to dive into why and how climate change will impact you and me, because it's right on our doorstep. We're going to be speaking to senior writers from the Straits Times who have been spending years writing and researching on climate change, and there are going to be a lot of videos and interactive graphics for you to look at as well. First up, we're going to start with Singapore, and Singapore is fortifying its defences against climate change, pumping $400 million into upgrading and maintaining its drains over the next 2 years, and $10 million more will be channeled into studying sea level rise. With me to discuss this today is science editor Chang Ai-Lien and assistant foreign editor David Fogarty. Hello.
Hello.
So, if I may quote, Minister of the Environment and Water Resources Masagos Zulkifli was saying on Wednesday, and he called climate change sort of the ultimate threat to human survival. Could you guys elaborate on this?
So definitely for Singapore, it's a very low-lying island. It's a maritime country. A large portion of Singapore is really not very high above sea level. In fact, I think most of Singapore is within 15 meters above sea level, and about a third is less than 5 meters. Now the forecast or predictions are for sea level to rise roughly about 1 meter by the end of the century, and if the rate of warming in Antarctica, Greenland and glaciers continues, that level of sea level rise will just continue into the following century. So for Singapore, it's a life and death issue, quite frankly, which is why the government is really focused on studying this issue, trying to find solutions. But of course, you must realize that climate change is a truly global issue, and we've seen many instances of extreme heat waves, extreme storms, flooding, droughts. There's a long and ongoing drought in Australia that affects food supply. The recent heat waves in Europe have set records. It seems that every year there's records being broken for many different measurements for climate. And this is worrying increasingly governments around the world, and particularly for the Singapore government, which is planning for the long term.
So what exactly is Singapore planning for the long term? What are the recommendations that are being made?
So in a sense, all the disadvantages that Singapore has faced as a small island nation with few resources are sort of standing in good stead now when it comes to climate change, because for years and for decades we have been preparing for our own survival, right? So this is in terms of food security, water security, energy security. And then one of our biggest challenges now is if we were to be engulfed because of a sea level rise, there's nowhere for us to run. We're an island, right? There's no inland area. So what was announced by Mr. Masagos earlier this week was that $10 million is going to be spent on research into sea level rise alone. And this is particularly important in the tropics, because there's not much work done with regard to the tropics. So basically we will be able to inform the science in Singapore and also in the region.
Right.
And once we have robust science, then we can decide, how much is sea level likely to rise and what we can do about it, whether it's raising land levels even more, or even other solutions such as having floating buildings, or things like that.
Right.
And we're also doing things in a whole range of areas. For example, water security. I think that's nothing new to us. We've always been very worried about water security. So now we have our 4 taps, including desalination and new water, which stand us in good stead again. And in terms of food, we have a new and ambitious goal to grow more of our own food.
Right.
So in case climate change disrupts food supply, we have our own food on hand. And the other plus is that there's a smaller carbon footprint because the food is grown here.
I see.
In terms of drains, I mean, all along we've been spending a lot of money, but this new $400 million is to reinforce drains and make sure they can stand up to any extra floods and all that. And the focus will be on upgrading drains in flood-prone areas.
I see. Well, it's all very government-centric sort of plans. So what did he say about the rest of us, sort of the citizens of Singapore?
Well, I mean, the government cannot do this all alone, right? Everyone has a part to play, including companies, organizations, and particularly you and me. So one of the things that Mr. Masagos announced was that 50 citizens from all walks of life will be chosen to be part of this focus group that will look at how to help people here recycle better and to go green. And this is quite important because our track record is not so good.
Right, so it's needed.
Yes.
So you'd say, governments, corporations, even individuals all play a part in sort of keeping.
So even, I mean, it's cumulative. Even if you feel, I can't do much, but, as a nation, there's a cumulative effect. So for example, I think one example given was that if each household here changes one fluorescent light to an LED light, that will be enough to power 1,000 4-room HDB flats.
Wow. So your personal impact does make a difference.
Make a huge difference, yeah.
So but climate change actually affects more than just temperatures in Singapore. In fact, it has repercussions everywhere. And this is seen very clearly in ST's recent Climate of Change series, where you guys explore sort of 6 areas in different parts of the world where climate change has made devastating impact. So for this project, we sent over 20 journalists, you would say, to 20 different locations. And in one of the stories, they visited Nepal to find out more about its mosquito crisis, a problem that is quite close to home. And we have a video, so let's have a look.
Dengue has rapidly spread and basically from lowland to highlands, and one of the factors for change in the distributions, a rapid distribution of these dengue is climate change, because climate change creates the conducive environment for the establishment of the disease vectors in the highlands, as well as it increased the blood feeding rates of the mosquito, which produce the more eggs and produce the more populations of the adult population of mosquitoes.
So what's sort of going on there?
First, let me say a bit about this climate of change project. I mean, it was one of ST's most ambitious projects to date, and we wanted to do it because we felt that it's so important. It was not just the 20 journalists involved, but over 60 front and back end staff across the newsroom. And we feel that, it's even more relevant today because everywhere you're sort of starting to feel the effect of climate change. So in this particular case, we looked at, we called it the rise of the mosquito. The mosquito is already the world's deadliest insect, or animal actually, because of the spread of disease, and warmer temperatures brought about by climate change would just be great for the mosquito. It'll just spread to even more places. And Nepal is a case in point, because 14 years ago, Nepal had no cases of dengue. And now there are outbreaks all over. Sure. So in terms of Singapore, we're already in the midst of a dengue outbreak, and figures are pretty high. Things don't look good if we don't act fast. Yeah.
So why exactly is dengue becoming a rising problem?
Because with increasing temperatures, the climate becomes more suitable for mosquitoes to breed, and the breeding cycle actually becomes shorter. So there will be more mosquitoes, and even mosquitoes in places where you've never seen them before.
Oh wow. Yeah. So mosquitoes are coming more and faster, you would say? More
and faster, and spreading disease, yes.
Oh dear. If you'd like to know more about this, do visit our interactive with the link that will be appearing on our screen that leads you to the mosquitoes interactive that they have made. So if we can pivot a little bit from sickness and move on to food, which is also being affected by climate change, it's forcing us to sort of change the way we obtain our food. So for example, rice is a staple in nearly half the world's population, but yields are being stagnated as climate risks grow. So researchers are currently developing what is called super rice, and we also have a video for that, so do have a look.
Professor Furbank and his team are part of the global C4 rice project that is working on creating super rice. Work could lead to dramatic jumps in yields for other crops too. If they succeed, they could increase rice yields by at least 50% and slash fertilizer and water use. It would trigger another green revolution and could mean enough food for a global population of about 10 billion people later this century.
So why is there a need for super rice?
Well, as you pointed out, yields for rice, and in fact other grains, including wheat, have plateaued. Over many decades of development of breeding new varieties, rice, there's thousands of different varieties, and they've been adapted to all sorts of different conditions. But the yields have basically flatlined. They can't seem to get any more rice out of a rice plant. And this is a problem for a couple of reasons. The UN says we need to grow 70% more food by 2050 when there's 9 or 10 billion people in the world. So there's greater demand for food. But the problem, of course, now is that the weather is becoming more harder to predict, more extreme. That means farmers have a much harder time in bringing in a good and reliable harvest. That then flows down into prices of food and grain, which we've seen in the past can lead to shortages and riots. So what scientists now need to do is to come up with a whole new version of rice.
Okay.
So this is kind of the Green Revolution Mark II. We had a Green Revolution, big jump in yields in the 1960s. This time round, the scientists are turning into to nature in a way. What they'd like to do, and what in fact they are doing, is they've turned to corn. Corn has a much more efficient pathway of capturing sunlight, carbon dioxide and water. It's a process called photosynthesis. Corn can produce grain much more abundantly and much faster. It's much more efficient in using water, and it needs less fertilizer.
Right.
So at its very simplest, this international consortium involves universities in Asia, in Australia, and Britain, and elsewhere. They're trying to put the genes that govern photosynthesis in corn into the leaves of rice. Now, after 10 years, they're already halfway there. So it sounds a bit kind of like a mad science fiction experiment. But in fact, they're already there. They already have the kind of the genes governing the biochemistry for this. What they need now is to put in the genes to cover the anatomy. So basically, what you have inside a corn leaf to process sugars and other things that you need to fill the grain, that's going to go into the rice plant. So bottom line is the goal of this consortium is to increase yields by at least 50%. And if that happens, that will be a major change and a huge relief, I guess, in terms of food supply for the world.
And that is amazing. And that is
and many groups around the world are trying to do this with different.
Singapore too,
in Singapore too, they are creating their own breeds of super rice, which are perhaps hardier or have higher yields, different traits that are needed for different parts of the world.
Right. So we're all sort of working towards this goal at the same time, and I think scientists are trying their best. So far, I think science is always trying their best to alleviate these effects of climate change. But besides impacts on humans, like we've just discussed with rice and with dengue, we also see that climate change is affecting other species, for example, coral reefs. So again, we have a video that we've made. Let's have a look at that.
Coral reefs are fascinating. They're amazing places, and to go, you go into a different world. You go diving or snorkeling on a reef, and that's healthy, and it is absolutely magnificent. If you go and see that and you see a beautiful bit of reef and you see a sick bit of reef, it can't help but think, God, this is something that, something needs to be done about this. And then you think, well, because of human actions, the reef could disappear within my children's lifetime. It would be an absolute tragedy.
So what does the future look like if mankind doesn't get climate change under control?
And that's a beautiful video featuring our very own David here. So if you'd like to see the whole video, do go on to www.straitstimes.com/videos. So first of all, why do coral reefs matter so much?
So coral reefs are a major source of food and livelihoods for about 500 million people around the world, particularly in Southeast Asia. They only take up a very small amount of the ocean area, and yet they are home to something like a quarter of all marine species.
Oh wow.
So if you don't have coral reefs, you don't have basically functioning fisheries, and we all like to eat fish. But they perform another major role, and that is they protect coastlines. If you can imagine, coral reefs are kind of like a barrier to powerful waves, so they break up the waves before they hit the shore. So when it comes to storms, barrier reefs are critical in preserving coastlines.
I see.
So if you damage the reefs by blowing them up, or as unfortunately what's happening with some reefs are degrading now because of climate change, that can mean greater coastal erosion for...
So nothing's stopping the big waves from sort of hitting the shore.
That's right, yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
And we have scientists saying that the state of our coral reefs is in a very, very bad place. How so?
So when we looked at the Barrier Reef, I went with my colleague Mark Chong, who's a photographer and videographer.
Right.
And we spent a lot of time talking to scientists, conservation experts, the gentleman you saw who runs reef tours in the video. They're all quite concerned about the state of the Great Barrier Reef and indeed many reefs around the world. Coral reefs are quite sensitive to temperature changes. The coral reef species tend to adapt locally to certain levels of temperature. But what's happening now, just as on land, also in the sea, we're getting marine heat waves.
Right.
So you get periods of just even a rise of 2 or 2.5 degrees can really stress the corals.
Okay.
And if that lasts for several weeks, they can turn white.
Right.
And they eventually die.
So that's known as bleaching?
Bleaching, that's correct. Yeah,
Right.
So, and it can take a decade for a reef to recover from a single bleaching episode. So what we saw in 2016 and 2017 on the Great Barrier Reef were back-to-back very severe bleaching episodes in the north and the central parts of the reef. Upwards of about 50% of the shallow water corals died. And so Mark and I saw that for ourselves. You know, you go to different locations and you see some species of corals are fine, they're more tolerant, but others are just grey and dead, basically. Now, if there's no more bleaching in a decade, temperatures stay okay, then those reefs can recover. Then the baby corals can sort of settle on the reef and grow again.
So it's not too late?
It's not too late, but unfortunately, the predictions are that there will be more and frequent bleaching episodes. And in fact, yesterday there was a warning from the Australian Government authority that manages the Great Barrier Reef. It issued basically an urgent call saying that that there's a need for strong and very fast action to save the reef, and that means cutting greenhouse gas emissions. And that bleaching could occur twice a decade by 2035. And if that happens, the reef won't be dead, but it won't look anything like what it does now.
Okay, that's really terrifying and a wake-up call, I would say, to everyone to stop their current actions and be more green, be more environmentally conscious, which reminds me that we should talk about how climate change is affecting life as we know it. But the question is, what can we do about it? How can individuals affect change?
I think both of us can talk about this, but there's actually a lot that all of us can do. I think part of the problem is that a lot of people think climate change is a doom and gloom narrative that, you know, we really can't do anything about it. It's you know, what can we do about a heat wave and floods? It's all out of our control. But the point is, this is a man-made crisis. This is not something that, it's not an act of God. It wasn't imposed upon us. We're causing it. And it's the way we live, and it's the way we consume energy, it's our lifestyles, it's our economies. That's what's causing this. So it can be simple things from consumer choices. Buy more energy efficient appliances, for example, a good example of the LED lights. It can be, you know, next time you buy a new washing machine or fridge, you know, choose something that's a bit more energy efficient or certainly more water efficient. It can be your decision about what food you buy in the supermarket. Better to buy something that's grown locally because there's less emissions embedded in the transport, right? You know, if it comes from Malaysia, you know, that's better than if it comes from Holland or maybe Australia or the States. Don't drive your car so much, you know. There's lots of good public transport options. Take that. Go for a walk. It all sounds very simple, and in a lot of these cases, it is simple.
So yeah, I think the first step, I mean, maybe if you're not doing anything now, would be to think green, you know, to throughout your daily life, let's say, think to yourself, do I need this? Do I really need this plastic bag? Or, you know, should I use a styrofoam cup? Or, you know, or maybe think about eating less meat. You don't have to be vegetarian, but you could maybe eat a vegetarian meal once a week. So, you know, the baby steps.
And if you see the amount of rubbish that people throw out, right?
It's appalling.
It's when you actually see where it's all dumped, it can be quite embarrassing, right? When you see that some of that's mine, right? And either in Singapore, a lot of it gets burned.
And we waste a lot of food as well.
Yeah. But at least we've seen some examples of food digesters, so it comes out as compost. So those sorts of things are positive developments. But that doesn't mean people just keep chucking stuff down the rubbish chute. You know, the idea is to actually prevent a lot of that stuff going down the rubbish chute in the first place.
So I guess the first R out of the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, is the most important, which is reduce.
So rather than finding solutions, we should stop first generating this rubbish, you would say.
That's important.
Don't wait for other people to find the solutions. You know, you should really figure this out for yourself.
Right. Then the crux of the matter, I think, as Ai-Lien mentioned, is you should be mindful of your usage, what you throw away, what you're using, all that. Thanks for sharing more with us, you guys.
Thank you.
So to check out the Climate of Change series, do go to the short link that you see right on the screen here. And there are plenty of other stories and content on climate change on our website, www.straitstimes.com as well.